Tessa watched the vet's face turn pale the instant a slick, twisted shape slid free of the mare. She'd braced for a normal foal, but the horrifying newborn defied every instinct she'd ever trusted. Under the unforgiving glare of the midday sun, Tessa stood by the paddock fence, watching her mare, Briar, shift restlessly in the dry summer heat. Beads of sweat lined Tessa's brow as the relentless rays bore down on her denim shirt, yet she barely noticed the discomfort. She was too focused on Briar's uneasy pacing, unusual for a horse that normally carried herself with measured poise. Beneath the surface of Tessa's concern lay a tangle of anticipation. Briar was due to foal any day, and something about her demeanor set Tessa's nerves on edge. Even the ranch dogs, sprawled in whatever shade they could find, seemed unsettled, their eyes tracking the mare's every move. Was it just the scorching weather making everyone uneasy? Or was there something else brewing? As she opened the gate to approach her beloved horse, Tessa's heart thudded against her ribcage. Each day of Briar's pregnancy had been closely monitored. Tessa wasn't one to take chances, especially not after last year's scare with a different mare. That horse had nearly lost her life to a difficult birth, and Tessa still hadn't shaken the memory of watching the vet struggle to save both mare and foal. Now, seeing a flicker of anxiety in Briar's usually gentle eyes, Tessa couldn't help but recall the nightmarish feeling of helplessness when something goes wrong in the stable. She forced a reassuring smile, letting her hand glide along Briar's neck in comforting strokes, and whispered, "Easy, girl. We've come too far for things to fall apart now." Just then, footsteps crunched along the gravel path that led from the barn. Tessa glanced over her shoulder to see Dr. Ellis, the local veterinarian, whose calm expertise had guided countless horses through troubled times on the ranch. The older woman's hair was pulled back into a low ponytail, and her face bore that professional composure Tessa had come to rely on. "I got your message," she said, voice steady despite the heat. "Let's have a look at Briar. You mentioned she's been acting strangely." Her tone carried an unspoken question, and Tessa nodded, trying to gather her thoughts as Dr. Ellis bent to check Briar's vital signs. Sensing Dr. Ellis's practiced touch, Briar settled somewhat, but the tension radiating from her was unmistakable. The mare's coat glistened with perspiration, and her muscles quivered beneath the vet's palm. "Doctor." Ellis pressed her stethoscope gently against Briar's flank, listening to the rhythmic thud of her heartbeat and the smaller, softer cadence of the life inside her. The veterinarian's brow furrowed for just a moment, a subtle indication that confirmed Tessa's unease. Dr. Ellis stood, meeting Tessa's gaze with a somber calm. "She's showing elevated stress signs," she said. "Her temperature's a bit higher than I'd like to see this close to giving birth. We should keep a constant watch." As Dr. Ellis returned to her truck for some supplies, Tessa led Briar toward a shaded area near the stable, hoping the cooler air might ease the mare's discomfort. A few hired ranch hands ambled by, tipping their hats politely, though Tessa noticed their sidelong glances. Everyone on the ranch knew about Briar's upcoming foaling, and none could deny the tension hanging in the air. Tessa gave them a grateful nod, but offered no words. She was wrapped too tightly in her own thoughts, anxious and determined to ensure all went smoothly. That evening, as the sun dipped below the rolling hills, Tessa made her way to the stable's loft to grab fresh bedding for Briar's stall. The wooden beams creaked overhead, and the sweet scent of straw mingled with the sharper smell of hay. The old barn cat, Marble, wandered in lazily, weaving around Tessa's ankles in search of a stray pat. Tessa obliged, rubbing behind the cat's ears absent-mindedly while her gaze flickered to the stable window that overlooked Briar's stall below. The mare shifted from foot to foot, flicking her tail in a frustrated swish. Tessa felt her stomach tighten. She'd never seen Briar this agitated. Was it the intense summer heat? Or was the foaling closer than any of them expected? Later that night, Tessa set up a cot in the corner of the stable, determined not to leave Briar's side. Dr. Ellis had dropped by once more before sunset, running additional checks and advising Tessa to stay alert for any signs of early labor. The veterinarian's unease, though carefully masked, hadn't escaped Tessa's notice. Something about the pregnancy measurements, the mare's restlessness, none of it pointed to a straightforward birth. Tessa's thoughts spun in a loop of hope and worry. She mulled over the weeks leading up to this night. Briar had been healthy, well-fed, and supervised, with no indication that anything was amiss. Yet as Tessa listened to the mare's uneven breathing, she felt a creeping certainty that this foal's arrival would not be typical. Midnight came and went, marked only by the distant cry of a nightbird and the soft shuffle of hooves on straw. Tessa dozed fitfully, jolting awake at every sound, half expecting to see Briar lying down with the unmistakable signs of labor. But each time, Briar just stared back at Tessa through the dim lantern light, ears perked with a fretful energy that never fully left her. The hours stretched on in tense silence, and Tessa found herself stepping outside briefly to catch her breath. A gentle breeze ruffled her hair, bringing momentary relief from the stifling air inside the stable. She gazed at the moonlit paddocks, the wide-open fields cradled under a sky awash with stars, and tried to convince herself that everything would work out. At around 3 in the morning, Briar finally lay down, her breathing heavy and labored. Tessa rushed to her side, adrenaline surging. She carefully placed a hand against the mare's distended belly and felt a powerful contraction ripple beneath her palm. This was it, the onset of labor. Despite the swirl of fear, Tessa reminded herself that nature often followed its own course. Mares had been foaling for centuries without human intervention, and Briar was a strong horse, beloved and meticulously cared for. Yet the memory of last year's foaling emergency crawled up Tessa's spine. She dialed Dr. Ellis's number with trembling fingers, forcing her voice to remain calm as she asked the vet to hurry back to the ranch. Dr. Ellis arrived in a flurry of motion, pulling on gloves even before stepping through the stable door. Tessa stepped aside, allowing the vet to conduct an internal exam. Briar groaned low, her eyes wide. Tessa stroked the mare's mane, murmuring soothing words she hoped sounded reassuring. But the moment Dr. Ellis began to examine Briar, her expression shifted from focused calm to something close to alarm. Tessa's heart clutched. "What is it?" she managed to ask, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to remain composed. Dr. Ellis drew a breath, lifting her gaze to Tessa. "I'm not entirely certain. I'm feeling signs of labor, but the position seems off." Her tone was measured, yet Tessa sensed an undercurrent of urgency. "Let's keep her as comfortable as possible. We may need to intervene if the foal is in distress or malpositioned." Tessa nodded, her stomach in knots. She'd heard stories of breech births in horses, some with tragic outcomes if not corrected swiftly. Minutes dragged by like hours. Briar's moans grew louder and her contractions intensified, but something about the situation felt wrong, like a door that refused to open no matter how hard you shoved. Tessa hovered, biting her lower lip until she tasted the metallic tang of blood. She couldn't shake the feeling that whatever awaited them wasn't as simple as a common breach. The smell of antiseptic and sweat filled the stable, and Dr. Ellis pressed her ear to Briar's flank again, her face drawn with concentration. Suddenly, Dr. Ellis's body went rigid. She pulled away, blinking as if she couldn't believe what she'd found. Tessa's heart pounded. "What is it?" she demanded, her voice cracking. Briar let out a distressed whinny that echoed through the rafters. For a moment, Dr. Ellis didn't speak. Her eyes, illuminated by the stable lantern, were wide with shock. It seemed she was grappling with an impossibility, something she had never encountered in her years of veterinary practice. Finally, she exhaled a shaky breath and looked at Tessa with an expression that sent ice through Tessa's veins. We need more help," she murmured, nearly dropping her medical bag as she lunged for her phone. "I'm calling Dr. Baxter in from the city clinic. He's worked on extremely rare equine births." "Tessa, I'm not sure how to say this, but the foal—" Before Dr. Ellis could finish, Briar convulsed with another wave of contractions. Tessa knelt, pressing a calming hand to the mare's neck, tears pricking at her eyes. She could hear the panic in Dr. Ellis's voice as she spoke into the phone, could feel the tremor in the air around them. The night, once so quiet and still, had become a tangle of terrified whispers and frantic hoofbeats. In the chaos, Tessa's mind raced. She thought of all the hours spent preparing the stall, the specialized feed and vitamins she'd given Briar, the checkups, the reading she'd done on equine pregnancy, yet none of it seemed to matter now. If Dr. Ellis was so alarmed that she had to call in a specialist from miles away, Tessa could only conclude that something truly extraordinary or catastrophic was happening. Part of her wanted to demand answers on the spot, to force Dr. Ellis to explain what she'd found. But Tessa could see the shock on the vet's face, the pallor that had drained her complexion. She braced herself for a truth she wasn't sure she was prepared to hear. Outside, the ranch lights illuminated the driveway, and Tessa could only pray that Dr. Baxter would arrive in time. Each second felt like an eternity. Briar's eyes rolled back, her nostrils flaring in desperate, shallow breaths. Tessa pressed her forehead against the mare's, tears slipping down her cheeks. "You're not alone," she whispered. "I'm right here. Hold on." The old barn clock chimed 4 in the morning, its echo swallowed by the frantic energy within those wooden walls. Tessa cast one last glance at Dr. Ellis, who was pacing near the stable door, phone clutched in her hand. An unspoken question danced in the veterinarian's troubled eyes. What in the world was growing inside Briar, and how could they possibly deliver it safely? By the time Dr. Baxter arrived, the ranch was ablaze with urgency. Headlights cut through the pre-dawn gloom as his truck sped down the long driveway, gravel crunching and scattering beneath his tires. Tessa stood at the stable entrance, heart hammering in her chest, and watched Dr. Ellis hurry to meet him with an expression that betrayed both relief and dread. Though Tessa had never met Dr. Baxter before, she recognized the look of a seasoned professional as he hoisted a heavy medical kit from his passenger seat and strode into the stable. If there were any answers to be found tonight, they would come from him. Inside, Briar lay trembling in her stall, her breaths coming in ragged waves that shook her entire frame. Sweat slicked her coat, and her eyes rolled anxiously with every contraction. Dr. Ellis moved to the mare's head, murmuring soft reassurances, while Dr. Baxter crouched at her hindquarters, greeting Tessa with a brisk nod before slipping on surgical gloves. His demeanor was calm yet urgent, and Tessa's pulse thundered as she saw him exchange a quick, grave look with Dr. Ellis. Whatever he suspected, it wasn't good. The clamor of the other horses, rattling in their stalls, underscored the tension. Tessa stood by Briar's side, stroking the mare's neck, hoping that gentle contact might keep her horse anchored in the midst of this storm. Dr. Baxter began his exam with painstaking care, glancing frequently at Dr. Ellis, who provided updates on Briar's vitals. The stable lights cast harsh shadows across the stall, illuminating every fleck of dust that drifted through the air. Tessa felt those moments stretch, her heart in her throat as the mare let out another strained groan. Suddenly, Dr. Baxter's voice sharpened. "I can't locate a normal forelimb presentation," he muttered. "The shape is unusual." "Are we certain she was only ever in contact with a single stallion?" His question was directed at Tessa, but confusion snagged her voice. "Yes," she managed, cheeks flushing with alarm. "There's no way she could have bred with anything else. We keep tight control over breeding here." He looked unconvinced, but said no more. Instead, he adjusted his gloves, signaled for Dr. Ellis to bring an additional instrument, and probed further. Tessa shut her eyes against the flood of anxiety, certain she'd misheard the note of fear that quavered beneath Dr. Baxter's clinical tone. Outside the stall, one of the ranch hands hovered uselessly, wringing his hat between his hands. The night had darkened into a heavy cloak of dread, and Tessa thought of the old superstition that horses sometimes sensed evil before humans did. She swallowed, forcing herself to stay focused on the immediate crisis. As contractions ripped through Briar, Tessa felt powerless. She'd assisted in normal foalings plenty of times, but nothing about this was routine. Her mind spun. Had something gone terribly awry in the pregnancy weeks ago, unnoticed by every exam? Dr. Ellis had never reported any anomalies, and Tessa had done everything by the book: top feed, vitamins, stress-free environment. Yet here they were, facing the unimaginable. Dr. Baxter's jaw tightened, the muscles in his neck straining as he tried to reposition whatever it was inside Briar. Every so often, the mare's entire body jolted, and Tessa clenched her teeth at the tortured whinnies that echoed through the rafters. Then Dr. Baxter pulled back, breathing hard. "We need to sedate her partially," he instructed Dr. Ellis. "I can't manipulate the fetus without risking a tear. Whatever's in there, it's not presenting like a standard foal." That last statement made Tessa's stomach coil. She felt the ground sway beneath her boots for an instant, not presenting like a standard foal. Her mind balked at the notion, but Dr. Ellis offered no contradiction. Instead, she pressed a syringe into Dr. Baxter's hand, her eyes locked on Briar's laboring form. Tessa watched as the needle slid into the mare's neck, delivering a dose to calm her just enough for the vet to continue. As the sedative took hold, the tension in Briar's frame eased, though the contractions did not. Dr. Baxter braced himself and began a delicate internal procedure, contorting his arm in an effort to align the birthing canal. Tessa's heart pounded so loudly she thought it might drown out every other sound. She bit back tears, forcing herself to stay strong, to remain a comforting presence for Briar. This horse had been her companion for years, carrying her across fields and through trials, and Tessa wouldn't abandon her now. The smell of sweat, antiseptic and old straw hung in the air, a pungent reminder of how quickly a stable could become an emergency room. Minutes ticked by, each one feeling like an hour. At last, Dr. Baxter pulled away, lifting his gaze to Tessa and Dr. Ellis with a pallor that startled them. "I've never seen anything like this," he confessed, voice low. "I can't even determine how many limbs we're dealing with." A horrified hush filled the stall. Tessa's throat clamped shut. Was it some kind of severe congenital defect? She'd heard stories of catastrophic abnormalities in foals, extra legs, fused limbs, or worse, but the numbness in her limbs told her this was on a different level entirely. Dr. Ellis glanced helplessly at Tessa, then pressed her lips together and turned back to Briar. A surge of raw determination coursed through Tessa. "We have to save her," she said, more a plea than an order. Dr. Baxter nodded. "We'll try. But this might require surgical intervention, an immediate one. I'm going to prep for that. Dr. Ellis, get your kit ready. We don't have a moment to spare." Tessa stood, letting them pass as they hurried to retrieve what they needed from the supply cupboards. An emergency field surgery on a horse was never taken lightly, especially in a stable unprepared for complex procedures. Yet if they delayed, they risked losing both Briar and whatever she was carrying. While the vets gathered equipment, Tessa yanked open the stable door, calling for the ranch hand who still lingered under the eaves. "Carl, get me more lights," she barked, her nerves alight with adrenaline. "And bring extra towels, everything you can find." He dashed off, relief at having something to do evident in the speed of his steps. Tessa's breath came in shallow bursts as she stepped back into the stall, kneeling at Briar's side to murmur a quiet vow. "Hold on, girl, just hold on." When Dr. Baxter and Dr. Ellis returned, they worked swiftly, setting up portable lights that cast glaring beams on Briar's hindquarters. The mare lay half sedated, eyes rolling in disoriented fear. Tessa positioned herself near the mare's head, both to soothe her and to stay out of the vet's path. She flinched as Dr. Baxter produced a scalpel, carefully positioning himself for an emergency cesarean. Tessa swallowed hard, praying Briar's heart would endure the trauma. For a split second, the stable was dreadfully silent, and Tessa thought she caught the faint smell of ozone as a distant flash of heat lightning lit the night sky. Dr. Baxter made the incision with practiced precision, though Tessa could see tremors of anxiety in his fingers. Blood welled, and Dr. Ellis pressed clean towels to contain it, her jaw set. The next moments were a blur of medical commands, each word fueling Tessa's dread. Then Dr. Baxter paused, his expression turning ghostly white as he peered inside the mare. "Oh, dear God," he breathed. He looked up at Dr. Ellis, whose face had drained of color. Neither spoke further, but their eyes locked in shared disbelief. Heart-hammering, Tessa craned her neck, needing to see what had them both so shaken. A swirl of fluid obscured her view, but as Dr. Baxter gently maneuvered deeper, Tessa's gaze landed on something that didn't look like anything she could identify. It wasn't merely a deformed foal. It appeared to have a slick, elongated form. Where she might have expected to see a single muzzle and forelegs, there was a nightmarish shape that looked too long, too twisting, as if it belonged to an altogether different species. Dr. Ellis swallowed hard, voice quavering. "We have to get it out," she whispered, refusing to blink even though her eyes shone with rising panic. "If we don't, Briar won't survive." Dr. Baxter nodded tightly, and they began the painstaking process of extracting the creature. Tessa stood rooted to the spot, equal parts horror and devotion compelling her to stay. No matter what bizarre monstrosity was emerging, she could not abandon Briar. The mare's labored breathing tore at Tessa's heart, and every exhalation sounded like a plea for release from unimaginable pain. As Dr. Ellis slowly lifted the mysterious form free of Briar's body, Tessa's eyes widened. The mass glistened beneath the glaring stable lights, and the shape was undeniably wrong for any equine newborn. At first, Tessa thought the creature was still lifeless. Then its elongated neck twitched, causing Dr. Ellis to drop it with a gasping shriek. It landed in the straw, a wet, writhing figure that moved with a serpentine twist. Tessa clamped a hand over her mouth, almost choking on a scream she couldn't release. In the haze of shock, Tessa noticed that Dr. Baxter had gone pale, his brows knit in confusion and dread. His usual calm shattered. He crouched down beside the unnatural newborn, stethoscope in trembling hands. Tessa could hardly process the sight. No hooves, no familiar equine features, only a strange, slick body with small, stunted limbs and an elongated head that opened its mouth in a soundless gasp. Panic thundered through the stable as Dr. Ellis, momentarily frozen, scrambled to check Briar's vital signs. Tessa tore her gaze from the writhing creature, pressing her forehead to Briar's cheek. The mare's eyes flickered weakly, her breathing shockingly irregular. "Please," Tessa whispered, tears streaming down her face, "just stay with me." But in that moment, chaos erupted. The unnatural newborn jerked against the straw, Dr. Baxter shouting for help, Dr. Ellis screaming that Briar was crashing. Tessa snapped her head up, horror tearing at her every sense. She couldn't lose Briar, not after everything they'd endured. Yet the stable air felt suffocating, the swirl of confusion and dread nearly overpowering. Thunder rumbled distantly and the lights flickered. Tessa squeezed Briar's neck, terrified of the choice she might be forced to make: to save a mare she loved more than anything, or to deal with the thing that should never have been born. And in that fractured instant, she understood one terrible truth. Whatever had just come into the world was about to change her life and the ranch forever. Tessa found herself pulled between two disasters unfolding in the same stall. On one side lay Briar, her beloved mare, breathing in shallow rasps as blood seeped from the surgical incision. On the other side writhed the unnatural newborn, twitching against the straw under the glare of the portable lights. An eerie hush stretched through the stable, broken only by Dr. Baxter's frantic commands for gauze and suction, while Dr. Ellis struggled to stabilize Briar's vitals. In the corner, Carl stood petrified, a roll of towels in his arms, eyes wide with terror. Tessa could hardly piece together her own thoughts, swallowed by the single, pounding need to save Briar, whatever it took, however impossible it might feel. The monstrous creature flailed with a lethargic, squirming motion. Tessa caught a glimpse of glistening skin that seemed too smooth for anything equine, its elongated neck stretched upward, and a small, almost reptilian head gaped open without producing a sound. The half-formed limbs twitched, tipped by stunted digits instead of tiny hooves. Every detail hammered home the reality that this was no normal foal. Repressing a shudder, Tessa forced herself to refocus on Briar, who let out a weakening neigh, eyes rolling in pain. "Hang in there," Tessa whispered shakily, brushing sweat-drenched strands of mane away from Briar's brow. Her own tears blurred the mare's features, but she fought to keep her voice calm. "I'm right here. You're not alone." She could feel the tremor in her hands, her heart pounding so furiously that her ribs ached with the force of it. This was the horse that had carried her across open fields, the one she'd raised from a skittish filly to a spirited companion. To see her now laid open on a blood-stained blanket while the impossible thing she'd birthed wriggled a few feet away made Tessa want to rage against the world. "Doctor." Ellis pressed her stethoscope to Briar's chest and shook her head, speaking to Dr. Baxter in hushed urgency. Tessa picked up fragments of the conversation: lost blood, shock, uncertain outcome. Each phrase carved its own brand of anguish into her mind. Without turning from his position near Briar's flank, Dr. Baxter addressed Tessa. "We have to stop the bleeding," he said, voice taut. "Right now. That's our only chance. The incision is deeper than I'd like, and there's trauma from the birth. You may have to be prepared." She braced herself. "Prepared for what?" she managed, though her voice quivered. "Prepared for the possibility that she won't make it," he replied, grim. "If the uterine damage is too extensive, there's only so much I can do here. And that creature has complicated everything." Tessa swallowed back a jolt of fury at how he said creature, but couldn't find the words to refute him. She cast a quick glance at the deformed newborn that lay trembling in the straw. Could she even call it a foal? Meanwhile, Dr. Ellis scrambled to inject Briar with another round of medication to stabilize her heart rate. The mare's eyelids fluttered, as though caught between this world and some darker place. Tessa bent close, laying her cheek against Briar's muzzle. "I won't give up," she murmured, tears sliding freely. "I promise." Dr. Baxter worked with methodical speed to stitch the worst of the hemorrhaging. His hands, once trembling, now moved with the steady rhythm of a specialist on autopilot. Every so often, he paused to wipe sweat from his brow or to bark instructions to Dr. Ellis. The stable lights flickered ominously, as if the old wiring couldn't handle the emotional tempest gripping the night. Outside, thunder muttered, lending a low, distant rumble to the scene. Suddenly, the monstrous newborn convulsed, and Carl jumped back with a startled yelp, dropping the towels in a heap. The thing twisted its elongated neck, and for the first time, a thin, rasping cry issued from its throat. Tessa's skin crawled at the sound, something halfway between a whine and a hiss. Dr. Ellis looked over, her face ashen, but her hands never stopped moving over Briar's flank. Tessa tried to make sense of that pitiful noise. Was it a cry for help or a shriek of disorientation? The idea that the unnatural foal could be suffering tore at her, even as horror coiled in her gut. The sedatives in Briar's system seemed to dampen her more violent reactions, but the mare shuddered uncontrollably with every wave of pain. Each shudder jarred Tessa's soul, reminding her that time was running out. She pressed her forehead to Briar's neck, wishing there was some solace she could offer. Another memory flashed through her mind. The day she first rode Briar along a wooded trail, the mare's ears pricking forward with excitement. They had been so in sync, a partnership forged in trust. Now, Tessa felt powerless to repay that trust. "I need more light," Dr. Baxter snapped, shaking Tessa from her thoughts. Carl rushed forward to adjust the angle of a lamp, sweat pouring down his face. Blood, bright and horrifying, stained the straw around Briar's body. Every breath Tessa drew reeked of iron and antiseptic. Dr. Ellis whispered something Tessa couldn't catch, and Dr. Baxter nodded grimly. When he spoke, his words carried a hopeless finality. "We can't wait any longer. The hemorrhage isn't stopping on its own. I'm going to suture this now, but we might need a transfusion. If her vitals drop much further..." His voice trailed off. Tessa's throat constricted. She could see the raw sorrow in Dr. Ellis's eyes. Even as a professional, the vet was on the brink of tears. This wasn't a typical birthing complication. They were dealing with an aberration that defied anything they'd trained for. Tessa didn't know which was more devastating, the bizarre, flailing newborn that shouldn't exist, or the imminent risk that Briar might die before sunrise. She could hardly think straight, but one question burned in her mind, tormenting her. What had caused such a grotesque outcome? A genetic anomaly, exposure to something toxic. Tessa shoved those thoughts aside. The immediate crisis took precedence. If she let her mind wander too far, she might break. She forced herself to concentrate on Briar's labored breathing, to count the seconds between each strained exhalation. "Doctor." Baxter extended a palm toward Dr. Ellis, who placed a clamp in his grip. He proceeded with sutures, his posture rigid with tension. Tessa fought every impulse to recoil at the sight of her horse's blood, focusing instead on the whispered prayers that tumbled from her lips. Time warped in that stable, each minute stretched taut by fear. Occasionally, the newborn let out another rasping cry, and Tessa's stomach turned with conflicting pity and revulsion. Part of her wanted to comfort it, as she would any newborn life, but another part of her recoiled from its unnatural form. Outside the stall, the ranch seemed unnervingly quiet. Even the other horses had fallen silent, as though they sensed the grim scene playing out under the flickering lights. The minutes bled into an agonizing eternity. Finally, Dr. Baxter let out a sharp exhale, sitting back on his heels. "I've done everything I can for now," he said, removing his gloves. "We need to keep her stable, monitor her vitals, and pray she has enough strength to pull through." Tessa's breath caught in her throat. "Thank you," she murmured, not sure what else to say. He'd tried. They all had. Whether it would be enough was a question none could answer. Gently, Tessa cradled Briar's head in her lap, stroking her ears as the mare's trembling grew fainter. Dr. Ellis leaned close, checking Briar's pulse, then offered Tessa a tight nod. "She's still here," the vet said. "We'll do our best." From the corner of her vision, Tessa saw Dr. Baxter approach the newborn with evident hesitation. He knelt, reaching out to examine the creature more closely. This time, Tessa forced herself to watch. She needed to see, to understand. The lamplight glistened on the newborn's rubbery skin. Its eyes, half-lidded slits, flicked toward Dr. Baxter's hand. A faint mewl rose from its mouth, a sound that unsettled Tessa to her core. Dr. Baxter prodded gently at the creature's limbs and torso, shaking his head in silent bafflement. He looked over his shoulder at Tessa, expression riddled with questions he couldn't articulate. "What do we do with it?" Tessa asked, voice wavering. She hated herself for the harsh edge in that question, but she was terrified. If it wasn't a proper foal, how could they care for it? Should they? Before Dr. Baxter could answer, Dr. Ellis stepped in. "We keep it warm and see if it's even viable," she said, pressing her lips into a thin line. "As unnatural as it seems, it's alive. We have an obligation to give it at least a chance." Those words sank like stones in Tessa's heart. Obligation. Yes, they were veterinarians sworn to do no harm, and she prided herself on compassion for all animals. But this, she stared at the slick, wriggling mass that had torn Briar apart from the inside, remembering the raw agony in her mare's cries. Compassion warred with anger, a swirl of guilt and disgust. She felt like she was betraying Briar by even acknowledging the newborn's right to exist. Yet how could she simply dismiss it? Carl, still pale-faced, laid down fresh towels on the straw, and Dr. Ellis carefully lifted the creature onto them. It felt wrong calling it a foal, but Tessa had no other word. The newborn let out a rasping breath, legs twitching, as though trying to make sense of its own body. Whatever it was fragile. Tessa shut her eyes, feeling tears burn hot down her cheeks. There was no rewriting this nightmare, no going back to an hour before and averting it all. She was trapped in this moment, forced to confront something beyond comprehension. Behind her, Briar stirred weakly, letting out a faint, pained sound. Tessa spun back, gathering the mare's head into her arms again. "You did nothing wrong," she whispered, voice breaking. "You fought so hard." The stable lights buzzed overhead as Dr. Baxter pulled Dr. Ellis aside, presumably to confer about next steps. Their hushed voices blurred into the white noise of Tessa's racing mind. All that mattered was the slight rise and fall of Briar's flank. No matter what monstrous life had emerged, Tessa could not bear the thought of losing her mare. At last, Dr. Ellis approached. "We'll set up IV fluids," she said, voice subdued, "and a transfusion, if necessary. She's in shock, but if we can keep her stable, there's hope." Tessa nodded numbly, tears drying into tight salt tracks on her cheeks. She brushed her fingers over Briar's muzzle, noticing that the mare's eyes had slid shut, though her sides still expanded with shallow breaths. Through the open stable door, the sky showed the faintest hint of dawn. Tessa realized that the strangest, darkest night of her life was nearly over, but with daybreak would come questions, consequences, and a creature no one knew how to handle. A delicate veil of pale light crept in through the half-open stable door, illuminating the remnants of the night's chaos. Tessa hovered over Briar, her mare's head cradled gently in her arms, careful not to jostle the newly sutured area. An IV line snaked from a stand to the mare's neck, carrying fluid and hope into her weary body. Though dawn promised a new day, it also threatened a wave of questions and confusion that Tessa wasn't ready to answer. The unnatural newborn lay several feet away, wrapped in a pile of towels, and occasionally gave a thin, rasping cry that made Tessa's stomach twist. Dr. Ellis knelt by Briar's flank, keeping vigil over the mare's heartbeat. Behind her, Dr. Baxter carefully packed away the tools of the emergency surgery, though blood still stained the straw underfoot. The tension in the stable felt as taut as a drawn bowstring. Every small movement seemed amplified by the hush that had fallen over them. Even Carl, who normally chattered nervously whenever anything went wrong, stood in silence, hands stuffed into his pockets. He looked as if he might bolt at the slightest provocation. Briar's eyes remained closed, but Tessa felt a spark of cautious optimism when she noticed the faint rise and fall of the mare's ribs. Dr. Ellis, sensing Tessa's gaze, offered a tight smile. "She's still with us," the vet murmured. "It's too soon to say anything for certain, but we've done what we can. Now it's up to her body to recover." Tessa's pulse gave a small leap at those words, but dread still clung to her thoughts. She could not forget the creature that now occupied the same space where she'd hoped a healthy foal would lie. Dr. Baxter finished wiping a scalpel, placed it in a steel tray, then rose to face Tessa. "We need to move that newborn somewhere safer," he said, his tone composed but strained. "We can't leave it here in the straw forever. And we need to assess its condition properly." An immediate objection rose in Tessa's mind, though she couldn't put it into words. Safer for whom? For the newborn, or for Briar, who'd already paid a terrible price? Nevertheless, she nodded, swallowing hard. "Right," she answered, voice hoarse. Is it even stable enough to move?" Dr. Baxter approached the towels and knelt. The newborn shivered under his hand, making a soft clicking sound in its throat. Up close, it looked smaller than Tessa had first realized. Its elongated form measured only half the length of a typical foal, but that twisted neck and those misshapen limbs gave the impression of something older, more alien. Dr. Baxter gently prodded its sides, feeling for any skeletal structure that resembled normal horse anatomy. Tessa watched queasiness rising in her chest. She had to remind herself this was, in some inexplicable sense, Briar's offspring. Finally, Dr. Baxter turned to Dr. Ellis, who stood ready with a portable oxygen tank and a sedative injection. "It's weak," he said, "but alive. We need to keep it warm, keep it from thrashing. I'm not sure what nourishment it can take. There's no telling how its internal organs are arranged. But leaving it to die out here," he trailed off, glancing at Tessa with uncertainty. "There's a spare stall in the far row," Tessa said, her voice unsteady but determined. "It's smaller. We can section it off with a heat lamp. Briar needs this space to recover without disturbance." She didn't need to say that the creature's presence felt like a violation in the stall where Briar lay fighting for her life. Dr. Baxter nodded. Carl, pale but resolute, stepped forward. "I'll help," he offered, though his voice trembled. Together, he and Dr. Baxter carefully lifted the newborn, towels and all, doing their best not to jostle its strange limbs. Tessa and Dr. Ellis watched as they carried it to a vacant stall across the barn aisle. Even from a distance, Tessa could hear the creature's rasping breaths. She tried to steady herself, telling herself that caring for it was simply the humane thing to do, even if she was torn between revulsion and pity. As the men worked to set up the heat lamp and a makeshift bedding area, Tessa turned back to Briar. The mare lay motionless, though her breathing remained slow and steady. Dr. Ellis touched Tessa's shoulder gently. "Let's talk outside," she said. There was a compassion in her voice that nearly undid Tessa's composure. Reluctantly, Tessa stood, pressing a final tender hand to Briar's cheek before following the vet out into the early morning light. The sun had just started to crest the horizon, painting the ranch yard in soft gold. Dawn chorus from meadowlarks drifted in from distant fields, a gentle contrast to the agony of the last few hours. Doctor. Ellis led Tessa to a worn bench near the paddock fence, and they sank onto it, both exhausted. Tessa ran her fingers across her face, still sticky with dried tears. She knew her hair was plastered to her forehead and her shirt smeared with blood. But none of that mattered now. "We need to figure out what this means," Dr. Ellis began softly. "I've never seen anything remotely like that newborn. I can't even call it a foal. It's physiology. We don't have a precedent." Her voice wavered with both scientific curiosity and deep unease. Tessa nodded, her throat tight. "I can't stop thinking about how Briar got pregnant with that thing. We've only ever bred her with one stallion. There was no accidental exposure. Our fences are too secure. Are we dealing with some extreme mutation? Or did something else happen, Doctor?" Ellis exhaled slowly, glancing at the stable as though worried someone might overhear. "I can't rule out a genetic anomaly, but this is beyond anything typical. We'd need specialized testing, DNA samples, scans. Even then, the labs that handle equine genetics might be at a loss." A breeze stirred the dust at their feet. Tessa's thoughts turned grim. If this creature defied conventional explanation, how would the rest of the ranch community react? Already, rumors traveled fast in a small town. Someone like Carl, too rattled to keep a secret, might spill every detail. Tessa could imagine the whispers: a demon foal, a cursed horse, or something worse. She pressed her lips together in frustration and fear. "We need to protect Briar," she said, her tone heavier than she intended. "If word gets out, people might demand we destroy that newborn. Or they'll come to gawk, or brand us as reckless breeders. I can't have that." Dr. Ellis nodded. "Keeping this private for now might be best. Your priority is Briar's recovery. If she pulls through, we can focus on understanding the newborn. Until then, we do what we must to give them both a fighting chance." Tessa stared at the dust swirling around her boots. She felt drained, every muscle in her body aching, her mind teetering on the edge of sheer exhaustion. But she also felt a flicker of determination. "All right," she said quietly. "I'll talk to Carl and Dr. Baxter. Tell them we need to keep this under wraps. If they refuse, I'll beg them to at least keep silent until we know more, and I'll handle any questions from the ranch hands. We'll say it was a complicated foaling, that's all." "No details?" A hint of relief crossed Dr. Ellis's face. "I think that's wise. Meanwhile, I'll do my best to monitor the newborn's condition. I can arrange for more specialized equipment if necessary, though explaining why might be tricky." "Let's start small," Tessa replied. "We'll figure it out as we go." They exchanged a weary handshake, and Dr. Ellis went to check on Briar again. Tessa lingered on the bench a moment longer, letting the morning breeze cool her sweat-damp skin. She closed her eyes and tried to summon the image of a peaceful foaling. She pictured a soft, dappled foal wobbling on spindly legs beside Briar, nosing curiously at Tessa's hand. But the memory was a mockery now, overshadowed by the reality of what had crawled into the world. Rubbing her face, Tessa forced herself to stand and follow Dr. Ellis back into the barn. She headed straight to the smaller stall, where she found Carl still fussing with the heat lamp's extension cord. Dr. Baxter crouched in the corner, scrutinizing the newborn's bizarre anatomy with a flashlight. The creature curled in on itself, making faint whimpering sounds each time the vet lifted a limb. Tessa stood a few feet away, arms crossed over her chest in an unconscious gesture of self-protection. "How is it?" she asked, keeping her voice neutral. Dr. Baxter lowered the flashlight. "Weak, but alive," he said. "Its respiratory system isn't functioning like a typical foal's. The ribcage shape is all wrong, almost flattened, and I can't figure out if its limbs are fused or simply malformed. It's as though certain bones never developed fully." Carl grimaced, trying not to look directly at the newborn. It's making me sick," he muttered, guilt lacing his words. "I'm sorry, but..." Tessa placed a hand on his shoulder. "You've done more than enough," she said gently. "Go get some rest. And Carl, don't tell anyone about this. Please." Carl's eyes darted from Tessa to the squirming newborn. He gave a trembling nod. I promise." Then he slipped out of the stall, leaving Tessa and Dr. Baxter alone. An uncomfortable silence settled between them. Tessa steeled herself to ask the question she dreaded. "Do you think it's suffering?" she said quietly. "Would it be kinder to..." She couldn't bring herself to finish. But Dr. Baxter understood. He rose, wiping his hands on a rag. "I can't tell yet. If it's in constant pain, we may have to consider humane euthanasia. But we don't know enough. It responds to touch, tries to move on its own. That suggests it's functional, at least for the moment." Tessa's eyes flicked to the newborn's twitching form. Distaste mingled with a faint pang of pity. "Briar almost died," she whispered, "and this is what she got in return." Dr. Baxter's voice softened. "It may still serve a purpose, if only to teach us something about how nature can go astray. But for now, let's see if it stabilizes. And focus on getting Briar through the next hours." Tessa nodded. Wordlessly, they both left the stall and moved to Briar's side. The mare's breathing was steady but shallow, her eyelids fluttering as Dr. Ellis added another bag of fluids to the IV. Tessa knelt, resting her hand lightly on Briar's mane. A thick sorrow filled her chest, yet she had no tears left to shed. Instead, she whispered, "You hold on, girl. I'm not letting this be how our story ends." Outside, the ranch yard had fully awakened to daylight. Birds swooped over the paddocks, and somewhere a rooster crowed. But here in the stable, the morning's brightness seemed dull, overshadowed by a nightmarish tension that refused to lift. Tessa realized that this might only be the beginning of something far more complicated than a single catastrophic birth. Whatever had come into the world last night was now part of her reality, and Briar's fate, along with the ranch's, might hang on choices she never dreamed she'd have to make. By mid-morning, the ranch had begun stirring with its usual routines, but an undercurrent of tension wove through the staff's polite greetings and hushed conversations. Tessa stood in the barn aisle, arms folded tightly across her chest as she watched Dr. Ellis checked the flow of the IV hooked to Briar's neck. The mare's breathing remained shallow, yet there was a faint steadiness in her pulse that offered a glimmer of optimism. Nearby, Dr. Baxter emerged from the smaller stall, wiping his brow with a weary hand. Tessa didn't have to ask how the newborn was faring. The bleak look in his eyes spoke volumes. No one fully understood what they were dealing with, and in the growing daylight, the creature's bizarre presence felt even more surreal. Outside, a handful of ranch hands wheeled barrels of feed past the barn, glancing in with curious expressions that told Tessa they sensed something unusual had transpired. She mustered a quick nod of acknowledgement and forced her face into a neutral mask, praying they wouldn't probe too deeply. She planned to gather everyone later and deliver some version of the truth, that Briar had suffered a difficult birth and was in fragile condition. Nothing more. The details of that malformed newborn would remain secret, at least until Tessa herself grasped what it meant for the ranch and for Briar's future. Stepping into the smaller stall, Tessa felt her heartbeat pound against her ribcage as she caught sight of the newborn. Dr. Baxter had positioned a portable heater nearby, augmenting the heat lamp Carl set up hours earlier. The air was thick with warmth, almost stifling, but the creature's slick skin still twitched under the towels as though it couldn't quite get comfortable. Tessa found herself recoiling slightly at its shape. She still couldn't reconcile this trembling thing with the normal foal she'd expected. Its elongated neck bent at an awkward angle. The spindly limbs jerked occasionally, and its small, dark eyes seemed to track her approach in a manner that sent chills along her spine. "It's weak," Dr. Baxter said quietly, as though afraid to speak too loudly in the creature's presence. "I've managed to dribble a bit of electrolyte solution into its mouth, but I can't be sure it's swallowing properly. Without some form of milk or specialized nutrition, it won't last long. Then again, I'm not convinced it can process standard mare's milk." He exhaled, straightening his shoulders. "If you want to keep it alive, we may need to experiment with options until we figure out what this thing can tolerate." Tessa swallowed hard. Part of her balked at the idea of trying to sustain such an aberration. Another, more compassionate part couldn't bear the notion of letting it waste away simply because it was unnatural. She crouched cautiously, peering at its half-lidded eyes. Every instinct told her to reach out in some gesture of comfort, but she hesitated. She could almost feel Briar's pain radiating from the memory of the night's ordeal, and the blame she pinned on this creature made her hand tremble. "We'll do what we have to," she said at last, voice taut. "For now, please keep monitoring it. If there's a chance we can gather more information, maybe that will help us understand what happened to Briar." Just then, a soft whinny drifted from the adjoining stall. Tessa's heart leapt, and she rushed out to see Briar shifting her head slightly, her eyes blinking blearily. A surge of relief coursed through Tessa's veins. Dr. Ellis, who knelt by the mare's side, caught Tessa's gaze and offered a faint smile. "She's coming around," the vet murmured. "Her vitals are still tenuous, but at least she's responding." Gently, Tessa knelt next to Briar's head, letting her mare nuzzle against her palm. The old ache of heartbreak fluttered through Tessa's chest. This was supposed to have been a joyful time. Instead, it felt like wading through a nightmare where nothing made sense. "Easy, girl," Tessa whispered, smoothing down Briar's sweaty forelock. "We're all here for you, it's over now." But she couldn't bring herself to mention the newborn, and Briar, still groggy from sedation, simply blinked in confusion. Over the next hour, Dr. Ellis administered more fluids and carefully checked Briar's incision, grimacing at the bruising around the sutures, but noting that the bleeding had slowed. Tessa stayed glued to the mare's side, offering whatever reassurance her voice and gentle touch could provide. Each time Briar let out a labored breath, Tessa's anxiety flared anew, but the mare seemed a shade less fragile than she had in the darkest hours before dawn. At midday, Tessa finally forced herself to step outside for fresh air. The sun was high, and heat shimmered off the ranch yard. She rubbed at her temples, the beginnings of a headache pulsing behind her eyes. In the distance, she spotted two of the more senior ranch hands, Dan and Maria, exchanging whispers. They looked up guiltily when they noticed her, and Maria raised a hand in a hesitant wave. Squaring her shoulders, Tessa marched over, deciding it was best to address rumors head-on. "How's Briar?" Dan asked, sounding genuinely concerned. "We heard she had a rough night." Maria nodded, worry etched on her face. Tessa drew a calming breath. "She's stable. It was a complicated foaling, and we lost the foal," she lied, the untruth thick in her mouth. Her stomach clenched at the deception. But she reminded herself that revealing the truth would spark a firestorm of questions and fear. "We're focusing on Briar's recovery now." Please respect our privacy. She's in a delicate state. Maria's eyes glistened with sympathy. I'm so sorry, she said softly. Briar's a wonderful mare. If there's anything we can do... Tessa nodded gratefully. Thank you. For now, just keep things running smoothly outside. Dr. Ellis and I have it covered in the barn. The two ranch hands gave solemn nods, exchanging uneasy glances, but seemed content with that explanation. Tessa retreated, fighting a swirl of guilt and resolve. She hated lying, but in her gut she knew the ranch wasn't ready to handle the truth of what had really emerged from Briar's womb. Back in the barn, Dr. Baxter was kneeling once more beside the newborn's stall. He'd set up a small dish of warmed formula typically used for orphaned foals, though Tessa suspected it wouldn't do the job here. The creature made a strange rattling noise as it tried to shift closer to the dish, but its limbs splayed awkwardly, preventing normal movement. Watching it struggle, Tessa experienced a stab of unexpected pity. No matter how horrifying its appearance, it was undeniably vulnerable, flailing with a desire to live like any new creature might. "Has it tried to drink?" she asked, voice subdued. Dr. Baxter shook his head. "Not properly. It managed to get a few drops, but it's uncoordinated. Also, these limbs aren't shaped for standing. I'm not sure it can ever bear weight." He ran a hand through his disheveled hair, exhaling frustration. "I'm at a loss, Tessa. I studied equine medicine for decades, and this thing seems only half horse. It doesn't match known birth defects, not even the most extreme. It's as though it's part horse, part..." His voice trailed off, and Tessa caught the flicker of fear in his eyes. He didn't need to finish. She understood. Part something else, part something that defied explanation. They lapsed into a heavy silence. Finally, Tessa forced herself to speak. "We'll keep it alive for now, unless it's in pain." Her voice trembled, recalling Briar's agony. "If it can't survive, nature will make that decision for us. But if it can, I suppose I owe it to Briar's effort to see this through." She paused, voice growing colder. "No matter how I feel about it personally." By late afternoon, Dr. Ellis confirmed that Briar's heart rate had stabilized somewhat, though her condition remained critical. The mare dozed fitfully, occasionally opening her eyes to stare blankly at her surroundings. Tessa stayed in the stall, quietly humming an old lullaby from her childhood, desperate to offer any comfort she could. Memories of training sessions, long rides through sunlit meadows, and the excitement of planning for a healthy foal, all blended into a raw ache. Each memory reminded her of how drastically things had changed in just one night. Taking a moment to rest, Tessa leaned against the barn's cool interior wall, her eyelids heavy. She thought back to Briar's first year on the ranch, how the filly had been skittish around ropes and had once bolted at the sight of a stray cat. Gradually, trust had replaced fear, and they'd formed a bond that set Briar apart from all the other horses Tessa had ever owned. That bond was the only reason Tessa believed the mare would keep fighting. Briar was stubborn and loyal, determined to carry Tessa until the journey's end. As the sun started its slow descent, the newborn let out another thin cry from across the aisle. Tessa watched Dr. Baxter bend down with a bottle, a mixture of formula and other nutrients swirling inside. He coaxed it gently, careful not to startle the creature, though it barely had energy to startle in the first place. Tessa could see curiosity wrestling with revulsion on his face. For a moment, she glimpsed the same internal battle in herself. She was no stranger to unorthodox births. Nature sometimes produced heartbreak, yet none of those experiences had prepared her for a hybrid-like abomination that seemed to teeter on the brink of existence. Tessa drew closer, inhaling the faint scent of milk and antiseptic. She noticed that the creature tried to lift its head toward the bottle, a flicker of life that surprised her. Her heart twisted uncomfortably. "If it can eat," she murmured, "maybe there's more horse in it than we think." Dr. Baxter nodded slowly but said nothing, focusing on positioning the bottle's nipple near the newborn's odd, rubbery mouth. With tentative motions, it lapped at the edge, managing only a few drops before coughing out a spasm of fluid. Stepping back, Tessa gripped the stall door. She had to remind herself that the ranch's fate didn't hinge on whether or not this creature survived, but something deeper within her whispered that this was bigger than a simple birth gone wrong. The disquiet gnawing at her gut felt like an omen, a shadow cast over the ranch's future, and in the midst of it all lay Briar, her fate tethered to that savage night. Tessa wanted answers, had to have them, if only to prevent another unimaginable tragedy from ever happening again. For now, though, her path was clear. Remain by Briar's side, keep the newborn contained and monitored, and guard their secret until she understood what course to take. As evening settled in and the sky turned a muted pink, Tessa steeled herself for the long hours ahead. The stall lights buzzed overhead in rhythmic hums, and a hush fell over the stable, broken only by the soft shuffle of hooves. She wondered if she would sleep at all tonight, knowing that, at any moment, the fragile balance holding Briar and the newborn in this world could tip the wrong way. One more heartbeat, one more breath. That was how hope sustained itself now, quietly clinging to the possibility that by sunrise, neither mare nor monstrosity would slip beyond reach. Late that evening, Tessa found herself once again positioned on the makeshift cot inside the barn, the same spot where she had kept vigil the previous night. A small lantern cast a warm glow that flickered along the stable walls, highlighting dancing particles of dust in the musty air. Briar lay nearby, her breaths measured but precarious. The IV bag above her swayed whenever a breeze rustled through the rafters, as if emphasizing how fragile her life still was. Tessa's own muscles ached with exhaustion, yet her mind raced too fiercely for sleep. Doctor Ellis had gone to catch a short rest at the ranch house, promising to return before midnight to check on Briar's vitals. Meanwhile, Dr. Baxter occupied the adjacent stall, still intent on monitoring the strange newborn. Tessa could hear him shifting around, sometimes speaking quietly, as though trying to soothe the creature. She tried not to picture its twisted shape, but every time she closed her eyes, the memory of those elongated limbs pressed against her thoughts. She wondered if she would ever think of a foal the same way again. An uneasy hush permeated the barn, broken only by the occasional scrape of hooves from the other horses. Most of them had settled in for the night, though Tessa sensed an edginess beneath the usual calm. Animals often felt tension when something unnatural lingered among them. She adjusted the thin blanket across her lap, shivering despite the summer warmth. The day had burned away in a haze of worry, yet she feared the coming darkness even more. Night had been the backdrop for the calamity that nearly took Briar. What new horrors could it bring? She glanced at her mare, relief stirring in her chest when she saw Briar's ears flick in mild annoyance. "You're still fighting, aren't you?" Tessa murmured, reaching through the stall bars to brush her fingertips against Briar's mane. The mare let out a soft snort, as if in answer, and Tessa's heart swelled with love and fear in equal measure. She remembered the countless trails they'd explored together and the competitions won by trusting each other's every move. Now that partnership narrowed to raw survival, a testament to how quickly life could change. Just as Tessa began to drift into a half-doze, she heard a sharp yelp from the small stall. She jerked upright, adrenaline spiking. A muffled curse followed, and Tessa leapt from the cot, hurrying toward the sound. Peering over the partition, she found Dr. Baxter on his knees, massaging his left forearm, while the newborn wriggled erratically in the straw. "What happened?" Tessa asked, alarmed. Dr. Baxter grimaced. "I was trying to check its mouth again, see if I could get a feeding tube in. It jerked faster than I expected, might have bit me, teeth, or maybe something else. It's got these odd ridges along its gums." He removed his hand from his forearm and held it to the lantern's light. There was a faint red mark, but no break in the skin. Still, Tessa's stomach flipped at the notion that the creature had managed such a reaction. The newborn seemed agitated, its elongated neck thrashing slightly, eyes squeezed shut in a grimace. Tessa noticed that the towels beneath it were damp with spilled formula or saliva, perhaps both. Another strangled cry escaped its throat, and Dr. Baxter lifted an impromptu muzzle he'd fashioned from bandage material. "I was hoping to keep it from flailing," he explained, sounding both frustrated and sympathetic, "but it reacts strongly whenever I handle its face." Tessa leaned over the half door, her pulse still racing. The newborn turned its face toward her, making a feeble snapping motion. She recoiled. "Teeth?" she asked quietly. "That's impossible at this stage. Foals aren't born with fully developed incisors." "I know," Dr. Baxter muttered, "but it's like little nubs or ridges. They're too firm to be normal gums." He blew out a breath, wincing at the lingering pain in his arm. "We need to find a way to feed it without direct mouth contact, or it might starve." Unease gnawed at Tessa. She noticed the creature's breathing had grown labored, each intake a ragged gasp. The brief bout of aggression, if it could even be called that, seemed to have sapped its meager energy. "Is it dying?" she asked, voice trembling between pity and apprehension. "Not yet," Dr. Baxter answered, "but it isn't thriving either." He set aside the makeshift muzzle and laid a gentle hand on the newborn's flank. "Its heartbeat is too rapid. It's either stressed or in pain." "If it's in pain, that complicates everything." They stood in tense silence, listening to the rasp of the creature's breath. Tessa fought conflicting impulses. Part of her wanted to protect the newborn, to help any living thing that was suffering. Another part, a deep, fearful corner of her heart, whispered that maybe it would be a mercy if it slipped away quietly. She swallowed against the guilt riding on that thought, unsure how to reconcile it with her usual devotion to animal welfare. Weariness dragged at Tessa's bones. She rubbed her temples, remembering Dr. Ellis's words about containing the situation. "Let's try not to disturb it further," she suggested. "We'll keep it warm, make sure there's formula nearby, and see if it can rally on its own. If it continues to lash out, we'll try sedation." She paused, scanning the creature's trembling frame. "We need to talk about a plan for tomorrow. Word is going to get around that something strange happened." Dr. Baxter hesitated, nodding at last. "I agree. We can't keep the ranch hands and the local vet community in the dark forever. But for now, your instructions to keep quiet should hold off the rumor mill a bit." He shifted to stand, wincing as he put weight on a stiff knee. "I'll stay here a while longer, see if I can observe any pattern in its breathing or movement." Tessa felt a surge of gratitude. The older vet had already gone above and beyond the call of duty, stepping into a nightmare scenario he'd never trained for. She forced a small smile. "I appreciate that," she said gently. "I'll check on Briar again." As she walked away, the newborn let out a thin, pitiful moan that echoed in her thoughts long after she'd returned to her mare's stall. Inside, Briar still lay motionless, her eyelids fluttering. Tessa noticed with relief that the mare's breathing was slightly steadier than before. She sank to her knees in the straw, brushing a hand over Briar's flank in a soft, circular motion. "You're okay," Tessa whispered, as though the words alone could will her horse back to strength. The exhaustion settled into her limbs, but she refused to lie down. Instead, she kept one hand on Briar anchoring them both to the present. Hours slipped by, measured only by the changing pitch of crickets outside and the occasional shuffle of boots from Dr. Baxter. Eventually, Dr. Ellis returned, silhouette outlined by the lantern glow as she stepped into the barn. Her eyes were shadowed with fatigue, but she moved with professional purpose. "How are we doing?" she asked softly, kneeling next to Tessa. Tessa exhaled. "Briar's stable, for now." The newborn lashed out earlier, nearly bit Dr. Baxter. "It seems restless but too weak to do much else." Dr. Ellis frowned, glancing toward the smaller stall. "We should consider sedation if it becomes a danger to itself or others, but the sedation protocols for a normal foal won't necessarily apply here." She reached for her stethoscope, pressing it gently to Briar's flank. After a moment, she nodded. "Her heart rate is still high, but not at the critical level we saw before. Good sign." Relief rippled through Tessa's taut nerves. She closed her eyes, letting tears of sheer fatigue escape. Dr. Ellis offered a comforting hand on her shoulder. "You need sleep," the vet said gently. "At least a few hours. Briar's stable enough that you can rest without fear of something drastic happening this second." "I can't," Tessa whispered, though her eyelids felt like lead. "I can't leave her, not after everything." A quiet understanding passed between them, and Dr. Ellis relented. She helped Tessa onto the cot, situating it so Tessa could still see Briar's stall door. Then she checked the IV lines and ran her hands over Briar's incision with utmost care. "I'll be nearby," she promised. "I just need to consult Dr. Baxter about the newborn. Try to relax, even if you don't sleep." Tessa nodded, curling onto her side. As she drifted in and out of restless slumber, her dreams filled with fractured images, Briar galloping across a sunlit pasture, the monstrous newborn struggling to stand, shadows creeping through the ranch in the form of a gathering storm. Each time she jolted awake, she found the barn unchanged, Briar breathing softly, the distant shape of Dr. Ellis or Dr. Baxter moving about, the newborn's frail cries echoing in her mind. By the time the lantern light grew dim, Tessa realized she had managed a small amount of fitful sleep. She glanced at her watch. Nearly 4 in the morning, a full day since the nightmare began. Her back ached from the cot, and her throat felt raw, as if she'd been swallowing shards of glass. Forcing herself upright, she rubbed her stiff neck and moved toward Briar's stall again. Through the bars, she could see the mare's ears flick. That simple motion filled Tessa with a determined hope. "Another sunrise," she murmured, voice rasping. "We made it through another night, girl." She heard Dr. Ellis murmur something from the adjacent stall and realized the vet was discussing the newborn with Dr. Baxter in hushed tones. Tessa ventured closer, heart hammering. She could just make out their words. They spoke of organ function, abnormal scans they wanted to perform, the logistical nightmare of sending samples for lab work without raising suspicion. Tessa's chest constricted at the enormity of the situation. Pushing aside the urge to eavesdrop, she refocused on Briar. For the next hour, Tessa sat quietly at the mare's side, humming softly under her breath. The stable gradually brightened as the night relinquished its hold. Somewhere outside, a horse nickered, as though greeting the day. Tessa caught the faint aroma of coffee drifting in through the barn door, carried by the breeze from the ranch house. She swallowed, remembering she hadn't eaten a proper meal since before the birth. But hunger felt trivial next to the crisis at hand. As dawn light finally spilled across the straw, it found Briar still breathing, her coat glinting a dull chestnut in the gentle glow. Tessa brushed stray shavings from the mare's flank and found her muzzle searching faintly for Tessa's hand. A fragile smile tugged at Tessa's lips. "You're the strongest girl I've ever known," she said, voice shaking with relief. "Don't you dare give up now." Yet even with that thread of optimism, Tessa knew the situation remained dire. Until Briar could stand on her own, until the wound healed, there would be no true relief. And as for the newborn, the questions outnumbered the answers by a vast margin. Each new day might bring fresh revelations or fresh horrors. The next steps would require careful planning, secrecy, and a level of resilience Tessa wasn't sure she possessed. But if Briar could survive the impossible, Tessa decided, then perhaps she could endure whatever was still to come. Morning light seeped through the barn's open door, illuminating floating particles of dust that danced around Tessa's feet. She stood by Briar's stall, blinking away the fog of her scant sleep, trying to collect her thoughts. The faint hum of conversation drifted in from outside, where a few ranch hands prepared the day's chores. Despite the gentle warmth of the rising sun, Tessa's nerves remained on edge, coiled tight with the knowledge of what lay just a few steps away. She forced a steadying breath, repeating to herself that Briar had survived another night. That alone felt like a small miracle, one she refused to take for granted. Dr. Ellis appeared at Tessa's side, coffee cup in hand, looking similarly haggard. "Briar's temp is a bit elevated," the vet said, scanning the mare's vitals. "We'll keep administering fluids and antibiotics. Hopefully we can ward off infection. She's showing more awareness, which is good, but let's not push her. I'm not sure how soon she'll be strong enough to stand." Briar stirred at the sound of voices, her tail flicking against the straw. Tessa reached through the stall bars to stroke the mare's neck. The simple sign of life set a faint smile on Tessa's face. "She's a fighter," she whispered, though the pinch in her chest never quite eased. The memory of last night's terror clung to every breath, reminding her how slim the margin was between Briar's fragile stability and another crisis. Outside, Dan and Maria hauled hay bales across the ranch yard. The normal rhythms of ranch life beckoned, but Tessa knew she couldn't abandon Briar. She glanced over to the smaller stall where the newborn lay, half hidden behind the glow of the heat lamp. She steeled herself against the involuntary chill that always crept along her arms at the sight of that twisted body. "I need to check on it," she said, voice low. Dr. Ellis grimaced but nodded. They both knew they couldn't ignore the creature's presence, no matter how disturbing it was. Each day it survived raised fresh questions: why it existed, what it meant for the ranch's future, and, most pressing, whether it would ever develop beyond its current state of weakness and pain. Tessa left Briar's side reluctantly and made her way across the aisle. Dr. Baxter, seated on an upturned bucket, had his head tipped back, eyes closed, as though he'd snatched a moment of rest. The newborn was curled in the straw, trembling under blankets and towels that did little to hide its unnatural form. When Tessa approached, the older vet lifted his head, blinking in the dusty sunlight. "Morning," he greeted quietly, scrubbing a hand over his face. "I tried another feeding attempt an hour ago. It barely took anything. I managed to coax a bit of formula into a syringe and deposit it toward the back of its throat. Might have swallowed a little, but the rest dribbled out. I'm not sure how long it can keep going this way." Tessa peered into the stall. The newborn's elongated neck lay at an odd angle, its eyes half open. She noticed faint ridges along its spine, almost like scales, though that couldn't be possible. "Has it been crying?" she asked, recalling the pitiful wails from the night before. Dr. Baxter shook his head. "Quiet, for the most part." "Seems too weak to do much else." He paused, glancing at Tessa's troubled expression. "I know it's disturbing, but it's also living. If we do nothing, it'll die. Yet if we attempt more aggressive interventions, we risk prolonging suffering. It's a moral dilemma we never covered in vet school." The lines around Tessa's mouth tightened. "I can't just let it starve, no matter what it is," she said slowly. "Briar went through hell bringing it into this world. If there's a shred of a chance it can live without unending pain." She couldn't finish the sentence, guilt gnawing at her for even entertaining the alternative. She crouched by the stall, pressing her fingers to the blanket's edge. The newborn made a small, raspy sound and lifted its head by a fraction, as though sensing her presence. Tessa's breath caught when she saw the faint spark in its dark eyes, an awareness that unsettled her more than any grotesque limb could. It was as if it recognized her, or recognized that she was the caretaker of the horse from which it had emerged. The notion made her skin prickle with uneasy compassion. "Let's keep trying the syringe method," she said at last, forcing each word from her mouth. "And see if we can contact a specialized vet or a university lab who'll handle these samples discreetly. There has to be an explanation." Dr. Baxter nodded, though doubt weighed on his features. "Discretion is key. If word spreads about this, we may have more trouble than we can handle." The day wore on in a slow grind of repetition, checking on Briar, maintaining the newborn's meager feedings, and fielding quiet inquiries from ranch hands who sensed that something about Briar's difficult birth went beyond normal. Tessa stuck to her rehearsed answers, that it was complicated, that the foal hadn't survived, and prayed that no one pressed her further. By early afternoon, the blistering sun turned the barn into an oven. With the heat lamp still running for the newborn, Tessa found herself drenched in sweat, her nerves fraying. Dr. Ellis took frequent breaks to step outside, gulping fresh air and trying to keep her exhaustion at bay. When Tessa next checked on Briar, she found the mare gazing at her with an intensity that threatened to break Tessa's composure. She knelt, letting Briar sniff her hand. "You're looking at me like you have questions," Tessa whispered, feeling foolish for attributing human thoughts to a horse. Yet Briar's stare seemed to demand answers that Tessa did not have. She swallowed hard, leaning close to brush her cheek against Briar's muzzle. "I'm sorry," she murmured. "I wish I could say it'll all be normal again. I wish I could promise we'll run together across the fields by next week." Tears pricked her eyes. She felt the warm, comforting smell of horse fill her senses, mingling with the sharp tang of antiseptic. Movement in the barn aisle drew her attention. Dr. Baxter stood there, holding his phone. He stepped closer, his expression guarded. "I've made a few calls to colleagues who might consult confidentially," he said in a low voice. "No one's jumped at the chance, but a professor at a distant veterinary college agreed to look at photos and test results, provided we keep his name out of any official documentation." Tessa nodded, relief flickering in her chest. "It's a start. We'll send him images of the newborn. Maybe he can identify some known condition or species anomaly." Dr. Baxter gave a nervous glance toward Briar. "We'll have to be careful about any pictures. This entire situation is precarious." "Agreed," Tessa replied. She let out a shaky breath. In that moment, the stable seemed to shrink around her, its walls a confining boundary to a secret that felt far too big. They decided to wait until evening's cooler air before taking photos. In the meantime, Tessa set about her normal ranch duties with robotic efficiency, checking feed and water levels, ensuring the other horses stayed shaded from the punishing sun. Her mind drifted constantly back to Briar and the being in the smaller stall that had no name. At sunset, after most of the ranch hands had gone home or retreated to bunkhouses, Tessa and Dr. Baxter carefully entered the newborn stall with a small digital camera. Dr. Ellis stood guard, making sure no one wandered in. The newborn lay curled tight, its breathing shallow. Tessa watched Dr. Baxter kneel, snapping a series of quick photos. Each flash illuminated the creature's uneven hide, capturing every ripple of oddly stretched skin. "Hold the lantern higher," Dr. Baxter murmured, and Tessa raised the light. The newborn stirred, a trembling spasm rippling along its spine. A thin, plaintive moan escaped its mouth, and Tessa's stomach lurched. She found herself fighting an impulse to mutter soothing words. Regardless of its bizarre nature, it was alive and apparently scared. "Got them," Dr. Baxter said, standing with a wince. He cast a worried glance at the creature. "I'll send these to the professor tonight. Let's hope he's as discreet as he promised." "If these images go public," his voice trailed off, but Tessa caught the grim understanding. The ranch's reputation, and perhaps even the safety of all involved, could be compromised. Not long after, Dr. Ellis returned to Briar's side, while Tessa followed Dr. Baxter into the ranch's small office. He plugged his phone into a laptop, transferring the images with practiced caution. Outside the window, the final rays of daylight cast long shadows across the yard. As the files sent, Tessa hovered over his shoulder, scanning each photo with growing unease. Frozen in digital frames, the newborn looked even more unnatural, its too long neck and half-formed limbs painfully evident. A shudder rippled through Tessa. No one would believe this was a normal foal. Once the files were dispatched, Dr. Baxter leaned back in the chair, rubbing tired eyes. "That's that. Now we wait. And keep Briar stable," Tessa added softly. "Every day she improves is a victory, no matter what becomes of that creature." Dr. Baxter nodded. "Agreed. Though if the newborn survives much longer, we'll have decisions to make. It can't live on formula from a syringe forever." Tessa swallowed a knot of dread. She understood the implication. The ranch wasn't equipped for indefinite specialized care of such an aberration. They had no guarantee it could thrive, or that it wouldn't require more resources than they could provide. Yet she couldn't stomach the thought of simply abandoning it. They switched off the laptop and stepped outside. The sky had turned a velvety indigo, pinpricked by stars that shone coldly overhead. Tessa felt the day's tension settle into her bones. She and Dr. Baxter walked in heavy silence toward the barn, each lost in private worries. The hush of the ranch at night felt different now, less peaceful, more haunted by the knowledge of what lingered inside. At Briar's stall, Dr. Ellis gave them a tired wave. "She's stable," the vet reported, voice subdued, "sleeping, but still responding." Relief washed over Tessa, though tempered by caution. She peered in to see Briar's sides rising and falling, her eyes shut in an exhausted slumber. In the flickering lantern light, Tessa noticed the faint sheen of sweat had eased, and her coat looked less dull. Tessa closed her eyes for a moment, murmuring a silent thank you. Maybe they were turning a corner. Her mare was still alive. The newborn was hanging on by a thread, and now they'd reached out for outside help, however risky that might be. The hours ahead would be another test of endurance, but with each step, Tessa felt a fragile thread of hope weaving into the terror. She placed a hand on the stall door, letting the worn wood steady her frayed nerves. "One day at a time," she whispered. Then she moved to settle in for yet another sleepless watch, resolved to fight for Briar's life, no matter how dark the shadows loomed, and no matter what secrets the dawn might reveal. A hush fell over the stable as the evening's final glimmer of light faded behind the rolling hills. Tessa stood near Briar's stall, listening to the soft shuffle of hooves and the occasional rustle from the hayloft. She and Dr. Ellis had just finished the latest round of antibiotics and checks on the mare's vitals. Briar rested against the straw, ears twitching when Tessa's hand brushed across her withers. It was a small sign of responsiveness, one that buoyed Tessa's spirits after another exhausting day. Through the open barn door drifted the scent of damp grass, hinting at a light rain that might come in the night. Despite her fatigue, Tessa clung to hope. Briar's eyes had regained a faint spark, and for the first time since the birth, she managed a feeble attempt to shift her weight. "Doctor." Ellis approached with a clipboard in hand, exhaling as she glanced over the notes she'd taken throughout the day. "Her fever's down a fraction," the vet observed quietly, voice hushed so as not to jar the dozing mare. "It's not much, but it's better than no progress at all." She lowered the clipboard and cast a concerned look at Tessa. "Have you eaten anything yet?" Tessa shook her head, her ponytail swishing across her shoulders. "Not really. I've been grabbing water here and there, but I'm not hungry." In truth, her appetite had vanished the moment she'd laid eyes on that unnatural newborn. She couldn't banish its image from her mind, nor the memory of the anguish she'd witnessed in Briar's eyes. Between relief for her mare's gradual improvement and fear of what might become of the creature, Tessa's emotions churned non-stop, leaving little room for mundane needs like food. "You should try," Dr. Ellis chided gently. "If you pass out, Briar won't have anyone to sing her lullabies." She offered a small, teasing grin, then sobered. "I know how committed you are, Tessa, but your own health matters. Keep that in mind." Grudgingly, Tessa nodded. "I'll see what Carl left in the ranch house kitchen. He mentioned making soup." She lingered a moment, reluctant to leave Briar's side, but knowing Dr. Ellis was right. Giving the mare's neck one last stroke, Tessa murmured words of encouragement, then stepped outside into the cool night air. Clouds hung low over the ranch yard, blotting out the stars and casting the buildings in a dim silhouette. As Tessa walked the short distance to the ranch house, the gentle chirp of crickets was her only companion. The windows of the main building glowed faintly, a sign that at least a few ranch hands were still awake. Tessa pushed open the door and found Carl in the kitchen, hunched over the table with a steaming bowl in front of him. He stood at once, scraping back the chair and wiping his mouth. "Tessa," he said, eyes brimming with concern. "How's Briar?" "She's holding on," Tessa replied. "Thanks for asking, and thanks for the soup." She gestured to the pot on the stove, letting the warmth of gratitude soften her voice. Carl had been jumpy and shaken after the birth, but he'd channeled his nervous energy into practical help, cooking, lugging supplies, and fielding basic chores so Tessa could focus on her mare. He gave a tight smile. "It's not much, just a vegetable broth. Been simmering a while, so help yourself." Tessa ladled some into a bowl and sank into a chair across from Carl. As she sipped, she felt her empty stomach knot in protest, but the flavorful broth eventually settled her nerves. She caught Carl studying her. "What?" she asked gently. He fiddled with his spoon, glancing at the window. "You know," he said, voice low, "Dan keeps asking me questions. He suspects something more is going on. Last time we had a difficult birth, you didn't forbid folks from seeing the foal. He thinks we're hiding something big." Tessa's pulse quickened. She set down her spoon and inhaled. "What did you tell him?" "I told him to mind his own business and that the mare nearly died. If that's not big enough, I don't know what is." Carl shook his head in exasperation. "But Tessa, this is going to get out eventually. I'm trying to do right by you, but secrets don't last long around here." Guilt flared in Tessa's chest. She pushed the bowl aside, appetite soured by the realization that maintaining the newborn's secrecy was not sustainable. "I know," she whispered, "but until we understand what we're dealing with, until we're sure Briar's safe, I can't let rumors spiral out of control. The last thing we need is some local news station sensationalizing this or people showing up with pitchforks." Carl nodded reluctantly, returning to his soup. A tense quiet settled over them. Once Tessa finished half her bowl, she forced a watery smile. "Thanks," she said, standing up. I'm heading back to the barn. Dr. Ellis is keeping an eye on Briar, but I can't stay away too long. Carl opened his mouth as though to say something, then closed it, settling for a nod. Tessa slipped into the dark hallway and out the front door, her footsteps echoing across the wooden porch. A faint drizzle had begun, dotting the ground with moisture. She pulled up the hood of her light jacket and hurried back to the barn. Inside, she found Dr. Baxter pacing near the smaller stall that housed the newborn. He glanced up when she entered, the harsh lantern glow revealing dark circles under his eyes. "It's becoming more agitated," he said flatly, gesturing to the stall. "I heard it whining and went in to check. It jerked around, made that snapping motion again. I managed to quiet it with a gentle sedative, but it won't last." Tessa rubbed her arms beneath the damp jacket. "Is it in pain or just frightened?" "Hard to say," Dr. Baxter replied, voice weary. "Could be both. I was about to attempt another feeding, but after it lashed out, I decided to wait until the sedative took effect." "The last thing we need is someone getting bitten." Tessa approached the stall door gingerly. By the glow of the lamp, she could see the newborn's form in a bundle of blankets. Its breathing was shallow, its elongated neck limp across the straw. Though sedation had dulled its movements, the occasional tremor ran through its body as though it were dreaming of a struggle. Tessa felt her heart twist in conflict. She found herself pitying it, monstrous or not. No creature asked to be born this way. "Let's see if we can get some nutrition in it," Tessa said, sighing. "If we can keep it calm, maybe we can avoid another outburst." Dr. Baxter nodded and retrieved a syringe filled with a carefully mixed solution of formula and supplements. Tessa slipped into the stall beside him, lowering herself slowly so she didn't spook the newborn. Together, they eased the tip of the syringe into the creature's mouth, pressing the plunger in slow increments. The newborn flinched, but it was too sedated to thrash. Small rivulets of liquid trickled from the corners of its mouth, glistening in the lamplight. After a few tense moments, it swallowed, then swallowed again, its eyes fluttering behind half-closed lids. A strange relief bloomed in Tessa's chest. At least it was taking in some nourishment. If only that guaranteed a path forward. She exhaled and glanced at Dr. Baxter, who wore a similar mix of worry and cautious hope. Then the newborn made a soft sound, a whimper rather than a growl, and Tessa felt her chest tighten further. No matter how uncanny its appearance, the fear and helplessness it conveyed felt all too real. Once they finished, Dr. Baxter stood, nursing his stiff knee. "Let's give it time to digest," he said. "If it regains too much energy and starts flailing, we'll need more sedation or a better containment method." Tessa nodded. Her hand hovered near the newborn's head, trembling with hesitation before she finally withdrew. She had no idea how to offer comfort to something so alien, nor whether her touch might simply distress it. Rising to her feet, she followed Dr. Baxter out of the stall. In the main barn aisle, Dr. Ellis met them, her expression lined with fatigue. "Briar's temperature is holding steady," she announced, an undercurrent of relief threading her voice. "She's resting now." A collective exhale of gratitude passed among them. Tessa realized how closely they'd become bound by this crisis. Each success, however minor, provided a tenuous lifeline. She placed a hand on Dr. Ellis's shoulder. "Thank you." "You've done so much," Ellis shrugged with a faint smile. "I'm doing my job, which is more than I can say for your poor mare. She's got the real work ahead of her, healing from that wound." Then her gaze flicked toward the smaller stall. "And you two, dealing with that baby." They didn't speak for a moment, each grappling with the uncertain fate lying behind that wooden partition. Finally, Tessa swallowed hard. "We fed it a bit. Maybe that will help." If it pulls through, I hope the Professor Dr. Baxter contacted can guide us. Dr. Ellis's lips pressed into a thin line. We'll need more than guidance if that creature manages to survive, but for now, let's keep it stable. A distant rumble of thunder punctuated her words. The approaching rain brought a hush over the horses, as though they, too, sensed the building tension. Tessa closed her eyes for a second, picturing a world in which Briar had delivered a healthy foal. She imagined the joy that would have filled this barn, the excited ranch hands taking turns to see the newborn stand on wobbly legs. Instead, they wrestled with secrecy and dread, unsure what new obstacles might loom on the horizon. Another night, Tessa said softly, turning her gaze to the stable rafters where a lone swallow darted. Let's get through this one, then see what tomorrow brings. She caught the faint nods of Dr. Ellis and Dr. Baxter, who seemed equally resigned to the slow, grueling process of saving two lives, one precious and familiar, the other frightening and unknown. Night descended with a quiet insistence, shrouding the ranch in shadow and leaving the barn lights to cast long, trembling shapes along the dirt. A muted rain began to fall, its gentle tapping on the roof a dissonant lullaby to the chaos within. Tessa paced near Briar's stall, her palms damp despite the chill in the air. She glanced at the smaller stall every few moments, half expecting a fresh outburst of that strange, rasping cry from the newborn. But for now, the creature lay sedated, enveloped in an uneasy stillness that both comforted and unnerved her. Outside, the ranch hands who remained on duty gathered in the covered walkway, smoking or quietly chatting in subdued tones. Tessa suspected they were speculating about the secrecy around Briar's condition, but fatigue outweighed her anxiety about gossip. She had no energy left to confront curious questions. Instead, she drew a deep breath of the damp air, braced herself, and slipped into the smaller stall to check on the newborn one last time before attempting any rest. Her boots squished against the straw, wet from spilled formula and the creature's occasional thrashing. The newborn's head lolled at an unnatural angle, yet Tessa noticed a faint stirring in its limbs. Its elongated neck looked more disturbing in the lantern light, each protrusion of bone and sinew stark against the wrinkled skin. She fought a wave of pity, or maybe revulsion. The two emotions felt indistinguishable in that moment. Though sedated, the newborn emitted a soft whimper at Tessa's presence, and she stepped back instinctively. Dr. Baxter, seated on a low stool, offered Tessa a weary nod. "Heartbeat is still rapid," he murmured, keeping his voice low, "but it's taking in a bit more formula. I think the sedation helps it relax enough to swallow." He set down a half-empty syringe and rubbed his eyes. "I can't promise it'll live, Tessa, but for now it's hanging on." She knelt, letting the lantern cast a soft circle of light on the creature's face. The muzzle remained an odd shape, its tooth-like ridges hidden behind half-parted lips. Every breath came with a faint rattle, as if the newborn struggled to pull enough air into malformed lungs. "What do you think our next step is?" she asked softly. "We can't keep drugging it forever, and if it can't stand, it'll never nurse. Not that Briar's in any condition to feed it anyway." Dr. Baxter's shoulders slumped. "That's precisely the dilemma. If we keep it alive artificially, we may just be prolonging its suffering. But ending its life prematurely, that's something I'm not prepared to do. Without absolute certainty, it can't improve." Tessa cast her gaze to the stall's floor, her chest heavy with the weight of impossible choices. She'd always prided herself on loving animals and championing their well-being, yet here she was, grappling with whether mercy meant letting this one expire. "Let's see what the professor says," she finally managed, recalling the photos they'd sent. "Maybe we'll get some direction." She stood again, stepping aside so Dr. Baxter could move around the newborn's fragile form. They checked the half-empty dish of formula set near its muzzle, then repositioned a blanket so it wouldn't catch on the creature's flailing limbs. The sedation seemed to hold, its spasm of activity subdued for now. Another soft whimper broke from its throat, and Tessa felt the back of her neck prickle. She nodded at Dr. Baxter, then turned away, guilt clinging to her like cobwebs. She returned to Briar's stall, where Dr. Ellis had settled on a stool, scribbling final notes for the night. The rain picked up outside, each drop creating a dull patter against the barn roof. Tessa took a seat on the floor, leaning back against the cool wooden boards. Briar dozed in an uneasy slumber, her flank rising and falling in a measured rhythm that proved she was still fighting to heal. Every so often, the mare twitched an ear or flicked her tail, as if chasing off a bad dream. "Maybe the rain will soothe her," Dr. Ellis murmured, not looking up from her clipboard. Horses can be oddly comforted by familiar sounds. Tessa nodded, though she knew nothing could fully erase what Briar had endured. She recalled the mare's earlier attempts to shift, a glimmer of progress overshadowed by the monstrous memory of that birth. If Briar pulled through, and Tessa clung to that hope, she'd carry scars far beyond the surgical wound. "How long do you think it'll be before she can stand?" Tessa asked quietly, hugging her knees to her chest. Dr. Ellis paused, considering. "It varies, especially given the severity of her hemorrhaging. I'd guess at least a few more days before we even try. Rushing, it could tear the internal sutures." Tessa closed her eyes. The thought of holding Briar upright, coaxing her to move, felt as distant as a dream. "I'll wait as long as it takes," she whispered. In the far corner, a horse nickered, and Tessa felt a dull ache in her heart. She longed for the day the entire barn would ring with the normal bustle of horse chatter and hoofbeats, unburdened by the tension that now lay like a fog over everything. Eventually, Dr. Ellis stood and approached, tapping Tessa's shoulder gently. "Get some rest," she urged. "You won't do Briar any favors by collapsing. I'll stay up a while longer. Dr. Baxter's in the next stall if we need him." At first, Tessa resisted, wanting to remain within arm's reach of Briar, but she knew her limits were fraying. With a final stroke along the mare's neck, she eased herself to her cot in the barn aisle. Closing her eyes, she let the drumbeat of the rain lull her until the swirl of worry and fatigue dragged her into fitful sleep. She dreamed of a wide, green pasture under a brilliant sun, where Briar cantered with effortless grace. A tiny foal ran alongside, a chestnut filly with bright eyes and strong legs that shimmered with health. The vision filled Tessa with soaring joy. Then the ground split open beneath the filly, and a serpentine shape slithered from the earth, dragging the young horse down. Tessa woke with a gasp, her heart pounding and her forehead damp with sweat. The lantern still glowed faintly, casting eerie shapes along the barn walls. She glanced at her watch, barely past midnight. Shaking off the lingering dread of her dream, she stood, stretching stiff muscles. Dr. Ellis had dozed against a hay bale, and Tessa quietly approached Briar's stall. The mare dozed fitfully, muzzle twitching. Tessa pressed her forehead to the stall bars, wishing she could offer more comfort than her presence. Briar's ears pricked faintly at the sound of Tessa's soft sigh, a gentle reminder that the mare's spirit still flickered beneath all that trauma. Drawn by an uneasy compulsion, Tessa stepped toward the smaller stall, half dreading what she might find. Inside, Dr. Baxter lay on his side, an old horse blanket folded beneath him as a makeshift bed. He seemed to be in a light sleep, because the moment Tessa crept closer, his eyes flicked open. "Everything okay?" he muttered, clearing his throat. Tessa nodded. "Couldn't sleep. Just checking." She peered over the stall door at the newborn, which appeared to be resting quietly. No flailing, no ominous whines. The sedation must still be in effect. Its strange chest rose and fell, each breath accompanied by a faint wheeze. Tessa felt a pang of relief. As horrifying as the creature seemed, she preferred this calm to the frantic thrashing she'd witnessed earlier. "I'm hoping it stays that way," Dr. Baxter murmured, rubbing his eyes. "We'll try feeding again in a few hours, but I won't sedate it again unless it shows signs of pain or agitation." Tessa studied his exhausted face, admiring his dedication. "Thank you," she said softly. "I know this is beyond anything you signed up for." "You could have walked away." He let out a ragged chuckle. "I'm a vet. You're paying for my expertise, though this situation goes beyond the normal calls for colic or broken limbs. Still, I'm not in the habit of abandoning living creatures, no matter how unusual." Tessa gently placed a hand on the stall's door. A swirl of conflicting thoughts tumbled through her mind. "This might sound strange," she said carefully, "but sometimes I feel sorry for it. Other times, I resent it for what it did to Briar, and then I hate myself for feeling that way, because logically I know it had no say in any of this." Dr. Baxter's expression softened with empathy. "It's not strange. Compassion and anger aren't mutually exclusive. The situation is monstrous, but the creature is just the product of it." He drew a deep breath and let it out slowly. "We'll figure it out, or at least do our best." Tessa's gaze lingered on the newborn. If it survived, she didn't know how the ranch would cope. But if it died, would she ever shake the guilt that perhaps she could have done more? An ache lodged beneath her ribs at the impossibility of it all. "I should go back to Briar," she whispered finally. "I'll see if Dr. Ellis wants to switch shifts soon." "Doctor?" Baxter nodded, rearranging the blanket beneath him. "I'll stay here. If anything changes, I'll wake you." He paused, dropping his voice. "Get some actual rest if you can, Tessa. I mean it." She murmured a faint acknowledgement and returned to her cot in the aisle. Briar let out a quiet snort, as though sensing Tessa's movement. Reassured by that small sign of life, Tessa lay down, her mind still spinning with half-formed worries. In the background, the rain's gentle patter on the barn roof became a lull that finally pulled her into a deeper sleep. She awoke to find the barn hushed, but for the rhythmic drip of rain and the steady breathing of the horses. Dr. Baxter was still with the newborn, slumped against the stall wall. Dr. Ellis dozed in a corner, stethoscope dangling from her neck. Tessa climbed off the cot, wincing at the stiffness in her back and neck. Dawn was not yet visible through the barn door. It felt like the entire world had paused in the middle of a long, uncertain night. She checked Briar, relieved to find the mare in a peaceful slumber. Then she inched quietly to the newborn's stall. One glance told her the sedation must have worn off. The creature stirred, pressing its elongated neck against the blankets. Dr. Baxter stirred too, blinking blearily. Sensing Tessa's presence, the newborn lifted its head a fraction, releasing a rasping moan. Tessa froze, her heart thundering. That sound was layered with something akin to plea, as if the creature recognized her silhouette and cried out for contact. Before she could decide whether to respond, Dr. Baxter placed a calming hand on the newborn's flank. The moan subsided into a pathetic whimper. Tessa realized she was holding her breath. This fragile moment, suspended in the darkness, felt like a tipping point, neither a step forward nor back, but a raw acknowledgement that life persisted even in the most harrowing shapes. A wave of fatigue and awe mingled in Tessa's veins. She and Dr. Baxter exchanged weary, understanding looks. as though both recognized the precarious dance they were in. Outside, the rain eased, and somewhere in the distance the faintest grey of impending dawn loomed, bringing the promise of a new day's questions. As dawn's pale light finally bled into the barn, Tessa realized another long night had ended. Yet the worries that had stalked her dreams still loomed large. The newborn stirred, letting out a frail gasp that rattled in its chest. Dr. Baxter, already on his feet, leaned in with a gentle hand on the creature's side, offering a few murmured words of reassurance. Tessa stepped into the aisle, rubbing sore muscles that protested every movement. She desperately wanted fresh air, but Briar needed her, and so did this strange, struggling life. In the stall beside Dr. Baxter, the newborn lifted its elongated neck and tried to shift its limbs, as though testing new abilities. Its breathing still rattled, but the creature's eyes had gained a flicker of awareness Tessa could not ignore. She clutched the stall door, heart twisting at the realization that it was fighting to survive. No matter how unsettling its form, it was alive and responding to their care. It had taken in formula through the night, and though it remained frail, it had yet to relinquish its tenuous hold on life. "Morning, Doctor," Baxter said quietly, barely glancing away from the newborn. "I wanted to feed it one more time before Dr. Ellis checks Briar's stitches." He held up a small bottle to show Tessa, concern etched on his features. "It's swallowing more with each attempt. I'm not sure if that's good or bad. It might be too weak to endure more strain." Tessa forced a thin smile. "At least it's trying." "That's more than I expected when this started." She cast a quick glance toward Briar's stall. The mare's ears were alert, flicking toward any sound, which Tessa took as a sign of improved awareness. Drawing confidence from Briar's apparent progress, she knelt beside Dr. Baxter in the newborn's stall and gently lifted the towel near its chest. The newborn twitched, but did not lash out. Its half-lidded eyes flicked between Tessa and Dr. Baxter. When Tessa eased the bottle's nipple toward its mouth, the creature whimpered, a thin, plaintive noise that pricked her heart. Sensing no immediate rejection, she guided the bottle closer. With effort, the newborn parted its jaws. Its tongue, slick and slightly forked at the tip, brushed the formula, prompting it to swallow. A cautious hope fluttered in Tessa's chest as she watched the creature take slow, uneven gulps. She had no idea what it might become, whether it would ever stand or walk or display any typical horse behavior. Still, it seemed to cling to the world, and she found herself rooting for it in spite of her earlier horror. "Good," she breathed, her voice soft. "You're doing fine." When the newborn finally turned its head away, Dr. Baxter set down the bottle. "That's enough for now," he decided. "Let's see how it holds up. I'll give it another hour, then we can try again." They moved out of the stall, closing the door behind them. Tessa exhaled, feeling a pang of relief, brief though it might be. Outside, the sky glowed in a gentle wash of pink and gold as the rising sun scattered the lingering rain clouds. She took a few steps toward Briar's stall and spotted Dr. Ellis inside, carefully inspecting the sutures. The vet's expression eased into a faint smile when she noticed Tessa. "She's more responsive," Dr. Ellis said, stepping out. "No sign of fresh bleeding, and her fever is stable. I think we can officially say she's out of the immediate danger zone." Tessa felt her knees weaken with gratitude. For the first time since the night of the birth, her spirits lifted enough to imagine a future where Briar might fully recover. "She's going to make it," Tessa whispered, tears burning at the corners of her eyes. "Thank you, both of you." Her voice cracked, and Dr. Ellis patted her shoulder gently. Dr. Baxter cleared his throat. "No thanks needed yet," he cautioned. She's still vulnerable, but yes, her prognosis looks a lot better than it did even a day ago. The three of them stood in the barn aisle, each battered by fatigue, each oddly united by the ordeal. Doctor Ellis tucked her stethoscope into her bag and flashed a rare grin. "I'll head back to the ranch house and check on those lab results," she said. "We still haven't heard from the professor, though it's early." Tessa nodded. "I'll stay with Briar." She paused, glancing at Dr. Baxter. "You should rest." He gave a short laugh. "That's the best idea I've heard all night." "I'll take a quick nap. Wake me if anything changes." He gathered his supplies and headed for a corner of the barn where extra bedding was stacked. Tessa suspected he'd stretch out there, lulled by exhaustion. Left alone with her horse, Tessa pushed open Briar's stall door. The mare shifted her head, nostrils flaring with recognition. Tessa knelt, pressing her forehead gently to Briar's. "You did it, girl," she murmured. "You pulled through. Now we just have to get you walking again." She traced a hand along Briar's neck, feeling the slower, steadier rhythm of her breathing. Though the memory of that horrific birth lurked at the edges of Tessa's thoughts, she focused on the warmth of her mare's coat and the resilience in her soft brown eyes. Hours slipped by in a calmer pattern than Tessa had known in days. She spoke occasionally with Carl, reassuring him that Briar's condition had improved. A few ranch hands asked if the foal had survived, but Tessa repeated her half-truth that complications had prevented a normal birth. She loathed the deception, yet every time she glimpsed the newborn's unnatural form, she felt convinced that the ranch, and possibly the entire community, wasn't ready for the truth. In a quiet moment, Tessa left Briar's stall to check the newborn again. She found Dr. Baxter wiping its mouth with a soft cloth, murmuring kindly as it let out a weak series of coughs. A faint beep signaled a text on his phone, and Tessa tensed. Perhaps the professor had finally replied. Dr. Baxter fished the device from his pocket, scanned the screen, and frowned. "It's from him," he confirmed, voice subdued. "He wants to set up a video call. Says the photos are concerning." Tessa felt her stomach clench. "Did he say anything else?" He wrote, "I can't identify this within known equine pathologies. Need live visual to assess further. If you can Skype me this afternoon, I'll advise. Strictly confidential." Her pulse hammered. A video call meant letting someone see the newborn in real time, its breath, its shape, the unnatural movements. She stared at the creature, which shifted feebly on the straw. "Then we do it," Tessa said, swallowing hard. "We need answers. Maybe he can guide us on how to keep it alive, or how to tell if it's better to let go." They arranged to conduct the call in the ranch office, where the internet signal was strongest. Dr. Baxter carried the newborn carefully in a basket lined with towels, stepping gingerly across the barn aisle. Tessa helped by holding the edges of the blanket, ensuring the creature didn't flop against the basket's sides. It let out a strangled cry during the short journey, and Tessa whispered soothing words, marveling at the fleeting sense of tenderness that welled up in her. In the office, Dr. Ellis had set up a laptop. When she saw the newborn in its makeshift cradle, her expression tensed with pity and apprehension. "Let's make this quick," she said, opening the video conferencing app. "We want minimal stress on both the mother and this one." The screen blinked to life, revealing a slightly blurred view of a man with silver hair and scholarly glasses. "Professor Ainsley?" Dr. Baxter asked, adjusting the camera angle. The professor nodded, mouth set in a serious line. Tessa hovered just off camera, the newborn's basket resting on the desk. Its eyes flickered in the glow of the laptop, as if responding to the new environment. "Doctor." Baxter carefully positioned it so the professor could see its body from multiple angles. though they shielded the most jarring details as best they could. "It's just as I feared," Professor Ainsley said, voice echoing through the speakers. "Based on your photos and now this live stream, this creature appears to be a partial hybrid. I've seen references to similarly warped genetics in fringe case studies, none fully verified." Tessa's heart lurched. Hybrid. "With what?" she demanded, her voice shaking. Ainsley sighed. "Hard to say. Possibly a rare mutation that expresses traits reminiscent of reptiles, or there could have been cross-species genetic tampering, though that would be highly illegal and improbable. Without advanced DNA sequencing, I can't be certain." He tapped at a keyboard off-screen. "Its external features suggest incomplete equine development. The respiration issues may be from an unformed thoracic cavity. If it survives, it could remain in a compromised state." Dr. Ellis stepped into view. "Are we talking about euthanasia?" she asked, her tone grim. Ainsley hesitated. "If the creature suffers, that may be kinder. But you said it's eating, yes? If it's able to process nutrients and doesn't appear in constant pain, you might attempt supportive care." He paused, studying the newborn on his screen. "It won't ever be a normal horse, but it might achieve a limited quality of life." Tessa closed her eyes, torn between relief and despair. "Is there a chance it might grow more stable?" "Possibly," Ainsley replied, "but it could also deteriorate. My best advice is to continue careful feeding and keep a close watch for signs of acute distress. If it remains stable, you may want to consider transferring it to a specialized facility that can handle rare anomalies. However, I must stress, the public reaction could be unpredictable." That last warning struck Tessa like a blow. She pictured rumors sweeping through town, the local press spinning wild theories, the ranch inundated with gawkers or worse. She turned her gaze to the newborn, which made a quiet sound, barely audible over the hum of the laptop. Dr. Baxter thanked Ainsley, and Dr. Ellis promised to send further updates. Then the call ended, leaving the three humans in a tense hush. "So that's it," Tessa said, voice hollow. "We either try to sustain it or end its life." She hated how stark the words sounded. Dr. Baxter placed the basket gently on a chair, meeting Tessa's eyes. "It's your ranch, your mare. The final choice rests with you. I can continue to help, but I'll respect whichever path you choose." Dr. Ellis exhaled. "Briar's on the mend, thank goodness, but we can't pretend this creature doesn't exist. If you want to keep it alive, we'll have to make arrangements soon. If you choose otherwise—" Her voice trailed off, understanding filling the silence. Tessa looked down at the newborn, remembering the nightmarish birth and the heartbreak Briar endured. Yet this battered, gasping life was also linked to her beloved mare. Could she bear to terminate it now? Or was that a mercy for them both? She pressed her palms against her eyes, tears threatening. At last, she drew a ragged breath and spoke. "We give it a chance," she said, voice trembling. "We'll find a way to care for it, quietly, until we know if it can adapt. If it's in pain or starts to fail, we'll let it go." Dr. Baxter and Dr. Ellis exchanged looks of cautious relief. It was a decision fraught with risk, but it was a decision. Tessa scooped up the basket, the newborn wriggling feebly within. "Let's return to the barn," she murmured. "Briar needs me, and I guess so does this little one." A soft, uncertain hush followed them as they left the office. Outside, the sun now shone fully. The storm clouds dispersed, making the ranch seem deceptively tranquil. Tessa's heart pounded with every step, uncertain of what lay ahead. Yet she felt a strange resolve guiding her. Briar had survived the unthinkable, and Tessa would endure the consequences of nurturing the life that had emerged from that agony. Somewhere deep in her soul, she believed compassion still held value, even when nature twisted into something terrifying. Clutching the newborn's basket, Tessa approached the barn with a fresh sense of purpose. She silently vowed to keep Briar on the path to recovery and offer this mysterious life whatever care it required, until fate or circumstance deemed otherwise. For now, that had to be enough. The newborn let out a raspy sigh, and Tessa answered it with a quiet, tearful breath of her own. The sun's warmth touched her face as she entered the stable, hoping with every fiber of her being that in saving these two lives she might salvage her own sense of hope in a world gone strange.